Ranil Wickremesinghe, thank you so much for joining me on Head to Head today. In 2022, in the wake of a huge economic crisis, and Sri Lankans taking to the street, and the Rajapaksa political dynasty basically falling apart, Parliament makes you president of Sri Lanka, and you stabilize the economy, you get a new IMF loan, you bring inflation down from 70% to 1.3% within a year. And then you lose the presidential election. You lose badly. You came third last September. Why do you think, despite that record, the Sri Lankan people rejected you so overwhelmingly?
In 2 years, maybe I had to put the economy back on track. And that means disinflation, compression. You're moving everything in 2 years. It's very, very difficult. Will you survive that? No, I can't see that. Look at Mrs. Thatcher. Her first term was a shambles, if not for the Argentinian junta.
Yes.
That's
the Falklands War.
Falklands just saved her. Look at Vajpayee, the second generation. You name it, in all the countries, the chances were that you would lose the election. I first came in not on the election. There was no one to take over, and there would have been a political and economic collapse of the country.
So your argument is that in that 2 years, you took painful steps, and like other incumbents, you were punished. There's a counter-argument that says you were also seen very much as an establishment man. You have been president once, prime minister 6 times, minister of finance, industry, science and technology, education, youth affairs, employment, deputy minister of foreign affairs. You've had almost every job title imaginable since 1977, since before I was born. Some would say that you are identified by the Sri Lankan people with a lot of the country's political and economic problems. You are Mr. Establishment in their eyes.
Well, I came out of the establishment, but I certainly didn't, I'm one of those who wanted to make changes, and they knew that. From the time I was Minister of Education, I was the reformer. But I'm not here to explain why I lost or something. I'm going to say, well, I'm quite happy I did the job.
Okay,
and
let's talk about the country back. So let's talk about how you did the job.
Yeah.
Some would say that you had an opportunity to listen to young protesters who were out on the streets in Sri Lanka, and you squandered it. You claimed to be a, quote, friend of the people, you said. But within hours of becoming president in the summer of 2022, you called in the military, you told them to do, quote, whatever is necessary to restore order, and then they violently crack down on protesters. How is bringing in the military being a friend of the people?
No one disregarded the views of the young people. When a president is appointed by parliament, whether I got elected or my opponent, you had to restore order. What will you do if the parliament is being taken over by a mob here? If a mob walks into the parliament, is that democracy or not?
I mean, Amnesty International say that outside of your office, 944 tear gas grenades were used by police against protesters.
Look,
30 people were injured, one protester was reported dead.
Amnesty International is discredited in our part of the world because they take different, some of them are laughing here, yes, I know.
mean, Amnesty tends to be discredited in countries that have human rights abuses.
I will tell you.
Please.
These were a group of people who killed one member of parliament. They nearly killed another member of parliament who was a major opponent of Gotabaya Rajapaksa and called for his resignation. They burnt a large number of houses. They came and took over Colombo. They attacked parliament.
European Union says there was unnecessary violence against protesters in Sri Lanka, the unwarranted use of force against peaceful demonstrators.
European Union had funded some of the agencies and they called for my resignation. The same union thereafter praised me as the man who took Sri Lanka out of economic crisis. Look,
that kind of undermines your argument. You like it when they praise you, but not when they criticize you.
I don't like them when they play.
You just quoted them praising you.
Look,
okay, I got another one for you. You made your answer. I got another one. You don't like the EU, you don't like Amnesty. UN human rights experts condemn the extensive, prolonged, repeated use of state emergency measures to crack down on peaceful protesters.
I'm sorry, I like
the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Look, I like the EU.
You don't like the UN?
I did not talk about the UN.
Well, I quoted the UN to you. You're still talking about the EU. We moved on from the EU.
Look, you finish everything you want to say about the UN, the League of Nations, the British Commonwealth, and then tell me after that I will answer.
Okay.
I have been in politics before you were born.
I know. I think I said that. I mean, some might say that's part of the problem. But let me ask you this. Yeah. Let me ask you this. You don't like the EU. You don't like the UN. You don't like Amnesty. So let me ask you about. Am I allowed to ask a question?
No, I wanted to correct one thing. I didn't say I don't like the EU.
Okay.
But we have now come to a stage in the world.
Okay. We cannot spend all night discussing your views of the EU.
Okay, then. Okay.
Let me ask you about. You made it clear. You reject all of these groups.
If you don't want me, I'm prepared to leave. If you say all you want to say, and when you finish, I'll give you 10 minutes, and then give me 10 minutes to reply.
Unfortunately, we don't have 10 minutes for each answer, otherwise we'll be here all night. But let me ask you this. Let me ask you this.
If I'm not dancing to your tune, I can leave. Maybe.
Okay, well, we appreciate you flying here for this, even though you want to leave in the first 5 minutes. But let me ask you this. When you delayed Sri Lanka's local elections in 2023, the Supreme Court said that your actions resulted in the infringement of fundamental rights of the Constitution due to arbitrary and unlawful conduct. You were a president picked by the parliament, not by the people, and you were so keen to avoid losing local elections that you just completely violated your own constitution. It's almost Trumpian.
We could not hold elections because we had no money. It was agreed by all the parties that I will have the presidential election and the parliamentary elections in 2024. And kindly remember, this case was filed in Supreme Court in 2023. The Supreme Court dragged that case out, and they said, okay, you have violated fundamental rights. By that time, there were no elections. We had stuck to it. We all wanted to get out of this mess, and that's why we did that.
The Supreme Court,
together.
Can I speak?
Yes,
the Supreme Court said you did have funds in the budget that were allocated for it, and you still didn't hold the election. You say you had no money, but you had enough money to attend the Queen's funeral here in the UK in September 2022. You went to the Japanese Prime Minister's funeral in Japan. You made a lot of state visits, but you had no money for elections.
Queen's funeral and the Japanese Prime Minister's funeral was in 2022.
Yeah.
This was for 2023. You know, our financial years run from January 1st to December 31st. And I had to come. I wanted to come. I was a subject of Her Majesty Elizabeth II, the Queen of Ceylon. She was the most popular figure that we had. Now you're telling me don't come to the Queen's funeral.
No, I'm saying you should not have violated the Constitution and held elections.
I didn't violate the Constitution by coming to the Constitution.
The Supreme Court said you violated the Constitution.
No, they didn't say. The Supreme Court could have given their rulings if they wanted in 2023.
So, okay.
They gave
I think the audience very much understands what I said. You can distract all you want. Okay, let's talk about the protests in 2022.
Don't lose your temper.
You became president.
Don't lose your temper.
I mean, only one of us is so far threatened to walk out. When you became president in 2022, the mantra at the time was "go to go home," which was Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president. His shoes, you filled them. He fled in July. You've always maintained publicly that you oppose the Rajapaksas, the family that have dominated Sri Lankan politics for 20 years. But your nickname for a lot of people online, as you know, is Ranil Rajapaksa. You've been prime minister or president on and off for over 30 years. What have you done to hold the Rajapaksas responsible for their alleged corruption and many other crimes? Why do you say you're opposed to them when you're clearly not?
When I became prime minister, we insisted that there should be inquiries into it. We created the Financial Crimes Division. There was a separate secretariat to inquire into corruption, headed by Mr. Anand Vijaypal, who is today the Minister for Public Security. And there was another one, the former head of, I think, Mr. Valiamuna, who Transparency International. Then there was the Bribery Commission. All of them investigated. Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was prosecuted, was released by court. Basil Rajapaksa was prosecuted, Namal Rajapaksa was prosecuted, Yoshita Rajapaksa was prosecuted.
There's a name missing from your list.
What's the list?
Mahinda Rajapaksa.
So they have to find evidence. No, it's not I who do it. Like your country.
I mean, there's allegations that he took $7 million from a Chinese corporation. You know there are many crimes they're accused of.
Look, in my country, it's the Attorney General who's not a political figure who decides on prosecution. We can only send the evidence before him. Attorney General decided what cases you should prosecute.
Many people think you're covering up for them.
I am not. Is the Attorney General? I am not the Attorney General.
I watched a video of you, actually. You attended the birthday party of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa in November 2023. And there's a video of you singing as the cake arrives.
So what's wrong?
Do you normally attend the birthdays of all the people you claim to be opposed to?
I mean, in Sri Lanka, we have our differences. But look, in our system, we go for social functions, weddings, funerals, all of that. Far as Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa is concerned, up to date, neither the...
I have been opposing the Rajapaksas all of this time, you said.
You are now got cornered. No? You are trying to say that...
I'm not the one who was at a birthday with an alleged war criminal.
What does it matter? It's Attorney General who decides whether to prosecute or not. So do you say that our Attorney General...
I just want to be clear. No. I've been opposing the Rajapaksas all of this time. Are you opposed to them or not?
No. Maybe
why were you at the birthday party with an alleged war criminal?
You are not allowing me to finish. Then that's
because you're not answering the question.
No.
You do realize that's what politicians do. I'm not new to this game.
I am not new to your game, Mehdi.
What's my game? Asking questions.
You've been cornering people and shouting at them. You think I don't know?
Yes, I'm the one shouting right now.
Look, I've known this, Mehdi.
Well, let's bring on our panels. But let me ask Madhura Rasaratnam is a senior politics lecturer at City University in London, executive director of Pearl, an advocacy group for Tamil human rights in Sri Lanka. How would you rate his presidency when it comes to accountability, when it comes to dealing with the Rajapaksas, all of these contentious issues in Sri Lanka?
You know, as you said, President or former President Wickremesinghe is an establishment figure. And he took the reform of the system that he is a product of as seriously as he's taking the interview, right? He came to power in 2022. He was placed there by the Rajapaksas, the majority that voted him into power against the wishes of the protesters who wanted total system change, because the system of which he has been a part, it has committed grave crimes. We've just produced a report that's amounting to genocide, but also then it has led to a collapse of the whole economy, because these crimes, they are systemic. Right? So he came to power, he had a golden opportunity on the back of the momentum of those protests, right, to really go for system change. And instead what he did was he put the show back on the road.
Let me bring in Nerjadeva, is a former presidential envoy for former President Ranil Wickremesinghe, former member of the British and European parliaments. Do you want to respond to Madhura saying that former President Wickremesinghe didn't take things seriously?
What has to be understood here, Mehdi, is that Sri Lanka is a very old democracy with institutions that surpass even what I found in the European Union. So when he said that he, as Prime Minister then, or President, cannot prosecute someone, even if he wants to, because unlike here, the prosecution is determined by the Attorney General, who is not a member of the cabinet. He's an independent legal official. And I remember when I went to Sri Lanka, when he set up the CDIU, the civil servants stopped working because they were so scared of making a mistake that no one wanted to make a decision. So he tried to prosecute.
Okay.
I know. And he couldn't.
So let me get Francis Harrison, who's sitting next to you, a former BBC Sri Lanka correspondent, author of Still Counting the Dead, a book on the final stages of the Sri Lankan Civil War. You were shaking your head as Nerj was speaking there. What do you make of this argument that it's beyond the presidency to reform the system, to get accountability for crimes, to deal with corruption?
Well, I would take issue, first of all, with the idea that the Attorney General is independent. He's the lawyer for the government. Every UN report talks about the conflict of interest there. I would ask former President Wickremesinghe why he didn't hold Gotabaya Rajapaksa accountable insofar as he assisted him to leave the country. People wanted him to be put on trial, and there were pending cases against him that had only been dropped because he'd acquired head of state immunity. Those cases could have been reopened. He let him escape the country. He let him come back to the country. Nothing happened. So that's a very serious question. I have one other question about the economy, which is Sri Lanka basically raided its pension fund, it's the employer's provident fund, in order to do domestic debt restructuring. A pension fund where 92% of the people who put money into that are the extremely poor. Should you not have taxed private bondholders, banks, and so on? You got Sri Lanka out of debt by doing it on the back of the poor.
Let's bring in the former president. You want to respond to a question, especially about Gotabaya Rajapaksa? You become president, he leaves the country. I think he went to the Maldives, and then he came back, and you didn't do anything.
On the EPF, we had to reduce the debt by 4.6%. 2.6% was taken up by the bondholders and the creditor nations. Then 1% of that came through the banks. And in the case of the EPF, what we dealt was the maturity extensions. So not a single person has lost a cent in that. The final one, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa as president and commander-in-chief of the armed forces, commanded the plane and left Sri Lanka. And he asked them to fly him to Maldives. Then he took a Saudi airline and flew to Singapore. When he went to Singapore, he sent his letter of resignation. He has not sent it properly, so we have to tell him, send it back and say, for God's sake, send it, or this is the way to send the letter.
Why did you let him back in without holding him accountable?
He could come in, there is no charge against him. How can I? I'm not a dictator.
I mean, you said to the military, do whatever you need to do to crack down on protesters, but you don't do anything to the Rajapaksas conveniently.
No, if the Rajapaksas are trying to block the parliament, you've done it.
They're accused of much worse crimes.
What you're doing?
I mean, as Madura points out, you didn't deal with Madura's point. She said that Rajapaksa's party actually made you president. It's a massive conflict of interest.
No.
Who made you president?
No.
Who made you president in 2022?
The members of parliament from both sides. A lot of the members of parliament of the SJB, the main party which broke from the UNP, were for me. A fair number of the Tamil members voted for me. I must tell you, half of the members there voted for Dalla Salha Perumal. Half of them voted for me.
Do you want to respond to that?
The parliament at the time had an overwhelming majority of the Rajapaksa parliamentarians because it was based on the previous parliamentary election. So just a simple mathematical calculation will show that he absolutely needed the votes of those parliamentarians to be elected.
You are wrong. You don't know anything of what was happening in parliament the time I was made president.
It was a Rajapaksa majority.
No, you let me. Now you got this thing. The Rajapaksas were split into two camps.
Okay.
There was one camp that was in the opposition.
Okay.
And there was one camp in the...
No, I'm agreeing with you. That's fine.
No.
We've got to move on. Let's talk about one of the key moments in your political career. April 21st, 2019, Sri Lanka is hit with a series of brutal suicide attacks on Easter Sunday, killing more than 260 people, injuring over 500. The attackers were affiliated with the militant group National Tawheed Jamaat, the NTJ. You were Prime Minister at the time. Indian intelligence had warned Sri Lanka of a threat. You said you personally never got that information because you were, quote, out of the loop and not getting along with the President, Sirisena, at the time. You've publicly apologized and acknowledged the, quote, collective responsibility of the government. I wonder, what about your personal responsibility as Prime Minister of Sri Lanka? Have you considered a personal apology? Do you want to offer one here tonight?
I've offered my apology and finished, Mahdi, and nothing more. The Supreme Court has cleared me. But I apologize as Prime Minister for this. Now, you know, I want to tell you one thing. I'm a Buddhist. One day, a man came to the Buddha and started abusing him. Abused him. When he finished, the Buddha asked, son, if you give a person a present and he doesn't accept it, whom does it belong? That man said, then it belongs to the person who gave it. He said, son, I won't accept what you have said about me, so it belongs to you.
Okay. Going back to the Easter Sunday bombings.
So let's do this. Let's do this calmly without getting excited.
Let me finish my question on Easter Sunday. Thank you for your story about the Buddha.
I have said about the Buddha.
Well,
I have said about the Supreme. I can also tell you something on the Christ, but I won't do that.
With respect, several hundred people died. It's not that funny. So let's ask a serious question. The Presidential Commission of Inquiry looked into the Easter Sunday attacks. They wrote a report that says, quote, the government, including President Sirisena and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, is accountable for the tragedy, and that the state's failure to prevent the attacks is, quote, the greatest dereliction of duty in the annals of public administration and law enforcement in this country. So I ask again, do you take any personal responsibility for, quote, the greatest dereliction of duty in Sri Lankan history?
Can I tell you, this is not the greatest dereliction, there are other derelictions.
That's what the report says. I'm quoting a report.
I'm not right about the report. The Supreme Court has said who's responsible.
But this was a Presidential Commission of Inquiry.
So let me say what they tell me, that I was responsible, but I put national reconciliation before national security. That I had been soft on the Muslims. If you think that's the ground on which I should be held responsible, you say so. I'm
not saying I'm quoting a presidential report.
So I'm quoting the rest of the report. You're only quoting 2 sentences.
I could quote you many more sentences. It was incumbent on the Prime Minister to raise in Parliament or Cabinet that the status quo be restored. You were having a fight with the President, and the people of Sri Lanka suffered because you were having a political fight with the President. That's what the report says.
If they say that I have been favorable to Muslims, and
I didn't say a word about Muslims. You can talk over me all you want. I'll repeat my quote. The government, including President Sirisena and the Prime Minister, is accountable for the tragedy. That's damning. That's damning. Hundreds of people died.
On that basis, they went to Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said President is liable, not the ministers, and all.
The same Supreme Court you dismissed about 20 minutes ago who said you violated the Constitution. Now you like them.
No. Should I have prevented the banning of the burqa and the naqab? Could I have prevented...
you should have raised the issue that you weren't invited to National Security Council.
I'm saying that the Commission is now hiding in what they have said.
Okay. When you were president, a damning 2023 investigation by Channel 4 here in the UK aired whistleblower testimonies linking the Easter bombers to former officials loyal to Gotabaya Rajapaksa. They were allegedly colluding as part of a plot for Rajapaksa to win the presidential election on the back of anti-Muslim feelings, which he did 7 months later in 2019. You ordered an investigation that rejected the allegations from Channel 4, once again coming to the defense of the Rajapaksas. But listen to what the head of the Catholic Church in Sri Lanka said. He said, quote, "It is clear that Islamist extremists carried out the attack, but there were other forces behind them. We have to conclude that the Ranil Wickremesinghe government is trying to protect them."
When the parliament wanted a committee appointed, I appointed Justice Imran, Muslim, Mr. Harsha Sosa, President's Council, a Catholic, and the former commander, Buddhist. They went in, it's a full report, and they said that this has not been proved, and it was proved that the official concerned was not in Sri Lanka at the time, he was abroad. Now, as far as I'm
Nobody has any faith in those committees.
Now, let me finish up. I am dealing with what is called the Catholic Bishops' Conference. All these have been given to them. They have not made any other comment.
They're all against the entire Catholic Church is saying you failed them.
No, this is what the Cardinal has said in regard to this inquiry, not anything else.
Yes, the head of the Conference of Bishops.
Who?
Bishop Harold Anthony Pereira.
Yes, so?
He says he wants an independent inquiry, and he supports Cardinal Malcolm Runjit, the head of the church, who says that you did not take requests seriously for an independent investigation, and what you commissioned, he says, quote, he told Al Jazeera, it's not worth even the paper it's written on, the commissions you did. This is the Catholic Church in your country. Damning stuff.
Can I tell you, Bishop Harold has been speaking to me all the time. If he has said this, I know that. We know the politics of the Catholic Church.
The politics of the Catholic Church. They lost hundreds of people in suicide attacks, and you're obsessed with it.
We know that. It's a question.
Is everything a game to you?
Sorry, you're going off your head at this rate. I appointed a committee which no one...
And quote, the committee was not worth the paper it was written on.
Wrong.
That's the head of the Catholic Church in your country.
You know, all nonsense he's talking of. Justice Imran.
The head of the Catholic Church is talking nonsense.
Yes.
I just want to be clear. A massive terrorist attack happens on your watch as Prime Minister. Hundreds of Catholics die. The Catholic Church say you failed us, and you dismiss them all as nonsense.
They have accepted the fact that I want to do, but they are saying is that the committee that I appointed, they are not willing to accept the findings of that committee.
Yes.
It doesn't say that.
They're also saying there were other forces behind the attacks, and you're trying to protect those forces. That's a damning accusation from the head of the Catholic Church.
Head of the Catholic Church. I am not a Catholic to begin with. And I go with the majority of the people in the country.
53% of Sri Lankans say they believe local politicians were involved in the attacks.
I appointed a committee at the request of Parliament. No one in Parliament has objected. It's up for the Parliament to decide whether they accept the report or not.
Okay.
It's not for the Cardinal. It's for the Parliament to decide.
Not for the victims of the terrorist attack. Got it. We will take a break there. In part two, we will go to our patient audience here in London's Conway Hall. We're going to talk about the fallout from Sri Lanka's civil war, a very big topic, and we're going to go back to our panel of experts also. So stick around and join us in part two of Head to Head tonight. Welcome back to Al Jazeera's Head to Head. My guest tonight is Ranil Wickremesinghe, former Prime Minister, former President of Sri Lanka. Ranil Wickremesinghe, thank you so much for being here tonight. We talked in part one about your presidency. We talked about the Easter Sunday attacks. Sri Lanka's brutal civil war lasted 26 years. It claimed the lives of an estimated 100,000 people or more. You yourself tried to broker a ceasefire with the LTTE, also known as the Tamil Tigers, in 2002. But last year, when you were president, the UN said, to date, the government has rarely even acknowledged the serious violations that occurred in the conflict or provided victims with adequate redress. In the 16 years since the end of the war, you've been Prime Minister 4 times and President once. Can you tell our audience today how you believe justice has been served on your watch for the victims of the civil war?
No contest. UN has said that. I'm not contesting. Next question, please.
That wasn't my question. My question was, how has justice been served on your watch for the victims?
I said no contest.
I don't know what that means.
I mean, this is what you say. If I go to answer, you will shout on me. So I said, all right, guilty as charged, no contest of whatever it is, get to the next question.
So you believe that victims of the Civil War have been
I don't believe
delivered
anything.
justice?
You're not giving me a chance to speak, so I'm not saying anything. I said no contest. So bring the next question, please.
It's a little bit childish for a former president of a country to not be able to answer a question.
I'm saying no contest. If I'm childish, Gandhi was also childish. I'm only doing what Gandhi did.
Gandhi didn't answer interview questions.
He didn't answer, he didn't even in British courts, he didn't. You don't know history. What can I do? We are a non-violent nation. We are from the Himalayas.
You're a non-violent nation.
I'm a non-violent
I'm literally
person.
asking about a civil war that lasted 26 years and killed over 100,000 people.
No contest again. There was no civil war for 20 years. What was the civil war?
There wasn't a civil war.
Will you let me speak without interrupting? Then I will say what
If you can answer the question, yes. This is not a platform for you to give political speeches.
I said no contest. You said I'm making political speeches. I'm a politician. So no contest. You get on to the next one.
Okay, let's try this. On your watch, there was an Office of Missing Persons that you set up. Your office investigated 6,000 cases of disappearances. Can you tell us how many people were found by that
No
office?
contest again. So if I say anything, it's a political speech.
I'm just asking how many people were found.
I will...
6,000 disappearances. Is it a joke to you?
No, the number who have disappeared, according to Francis, was far more. We are trying to...
Exactly. Amnesty says 60,000. I'm saying 6,000 because I knew you would...
No, there were 14,000 names that had come. So we are trying to do that. Again, split them into two lots. Those who were involved in the Mullawaikal incident and those who were outside. Because not only the... war there, we were talking about the disappearance in the south and others. Then once you identify the Mullawaikal, that's the big problem here. Then are there other numbers? Because 40,000 was not the big number that came. The disappearances, many of them, we are still going on.
How many were found by your office? Why is it such a hard question for you to answer?
What?
6,000 disappearances were investigated. How many people were found?
14,000, of which they're still going on.
16 people were found. Isn't that an embarrassing number? On your watch, only 16 people, 16.3%.
Sorry, that was done through different groups. Large number are missing. We had an ethnic conflict in the country. It's something which has struck all of us. There are a large number of you here because you couldn't live in the north. So let us look at how we are going to solve it. Not only the question of missing persons, but what has happened. It is not a simple civil war as such. She will, of course, disagree. But if you are not allowing me what to say and how that we could bring it around.
Has justice been served to the victims of the Civil War?
No, justice has not been served to any of the communities.
Okay. Why was justice not served on your watch?
Okay, I have answered your question that justice has not been served.
Answer the question.
So after that, you say what?
Okay, why did you reappoint last year as your Chief of Defence Staff a man named General Shavendra Silva, who the US government blacklisted for gross violations of human rights, namely extrajudicial killings? How can there be truth, reconciliation and unity, which is a commission you started, when you're keeping on board generals accused of gross human rights violations in that conflict?
General Shavendra Silva was there. He said he's willing to stand any inquiry. In our ones, we had not found anything. The Americans, though they blacklisted him, can't say what it is about. He served in UN and part of the office. As far as I was concerned, it's a practice not to replace military commanders during election. I didn't want to go and change it. But when I took over, I checked on it, and I was satisfied that General Silva was not involved in it. It's the US that has done it.
US and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, and the European Union.
Yes, but there is the US, there are no charges. He's willing. In fact, he's one of those who want the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to come into being.
So you set up this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and last year, when you were president, you got an open letter from victims of the Civil War, journalists, activists in the North and the East, and they said there's no point to this commission when they're still being subjected to, quote, surveillance, intimidation and harassment by security agencies and land grabs. Why were your security agencies subjecting them to surveillance, harassment and land grabs?
There have not been many. There have been some instances we stopped it, but I did not deal with it personally.
Why?
I kept out.
But it's hard to talk about truth and reconciliation if people are still being subjected to human rights abuses.
As I told you, we inquired. Some were correct, some were not. But I am not going to answer any more of this. I feel there are a lot more to be done to get justice for the people of the country or the Tamils.
Okay, let's go to Madura Rasaratnam, who's a senior politics lecturer at City University, executive director of Pearl, an advocacy group for Tamil human rights in Sri Lanka. As a Tamil, Madura, is it fair to say that the two people that a lot of Tamils in Sri Lanka want to see in a court of law are Mahinda and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who were respectively president and defence minister for the last most violent years of the civil war, both of them accused of multiple war crimes? Should they have been put on trial by now by successive Sri Lankan governments, including Mr. Wickremesinghe's?
I think, yes, the time for justice is long past. Mr. Wickremesinghe's attitude to your question about justice for the victims, the callousness, just exemplifies the attitude of the Sri Lankan establishment writ large and how we got to a point of, mass atrocities, right, on that scale. And just to say, of course, Gaza is very much on our minds at the moment, but there are unbearable similarities between what happened on the beaches of Mullawaikal and what happened in Gaza. In both cases, you have populations hemmed against the sea, subject to humanitarian siege conditions, incessant aerial bombardment, with atrociously high casualties, medical procedures being done without anesthetic on purpose. The UN estimates that about 40,000 people died in a space of 5 months. At the end of the war, 1,000 people were dying a day. Many, many more are unaccounted for. Those crimes occurred because you have a political system of which Mr. Wickremesinghe is a part for the past 70 years that has prioritized ethnocratic politics, pleasing the majority at the expense of good governance, at the expense of fairness, at the expense of justice, right? At the expense of efficiency. So what happens when you get that? Okay. You get escalating hatred against other groups, and you get poor governance leading to economic collapse.
Let's bring in Nirj Deva, who's a former British MP, served as an envoy for President Wickremesinghe when he was in office. Just respond to what you heard from Madura there about both the callousness of the approach to the war, but also the lack of accountability for the Rajapaksas. Yes. You were part of the Conservative Party in the UK. You know that David Cameron, Conservative leaders, called for international investigation of the war.
Watching this interview, there is an underlying thread which you need to recognize, and that is that the enforcement of law and order in Sri Lanka is much wanted. President Wickremesinghe's own house, with all his precious books and paintings, were burnt. To this day, not a single person has been arrested. So the question is not what President Wickremesinghe can or cannot do. It is whether that lousy system of justice is viable or it needs to be reformed. Now, that is where we all should focus our attention. If you want to look at Ranil Wickremesinghe's role in the ethnic war, look at what he did when he was Prime Minister, when he invited the LTTE to give up arms and come into the democratic system. And what happened? He broke the LTT in two. One half of the LTT decided to come into the democratic fold. I mean, quite frankly, sitting in the British Parliament, I was in European Parliament, I was outraged that terrorists were now given cars and given seats in Parliament.
Understood. Mr. Wickremesinghe, you didn't investigate. We just talked about the Rajapaksas for war crimes. Some people say you should be investigated. During the early part of the civil war, the Sri Lankan government faced an uprising, as you know, from the JVP, a leftist group whose current leader is now the president. There was this government commission of inquiry that found that in the late 80s, you were, quote, a main architect of securing a housing complex that was used for the purposes of illegally detaining, torturing and killing individuals linked to the JVP. The government inquiry reported that you, quote, to say the least, knew it was being used for illegal detentions and torture while you were living and working there. You didn't know what was going on there? You weren't involved?
Where is the report?
Sorry?
Where is the report?
It's called the Batalanda Commission report.
So where is the report? Read from the report.
I just did read from the report.
You didn't read from the report.
It is quite clear from the available material that insofar as the securing and allocation of the houses at the Batalanda houses are concerned, the main architects had been the then Minister of Industries, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe.
I deny all those allegations, and I'm asking you to quote that commission report. This is supposed to...
I just quoted it to you.
No, so where is that commission? Where had that commission report been tabled?
There's a lot of evidence in this report.
No, but it's not what evidence. There has to be a commission report.
There is a report. It's called the Batalanda Commission report.
There is no commission report. The commission report has to be tabled out.
Okay, but the report still exists, whether it's tabled in Parliament or not.
If it's not tabled in Parliament, it's not report.
Okay. In the report, a key witness who was your caretaker and, quote, trusted employee testified that you were leading meetings about the torture of detainees there. He died. He was 36 years old. Just days before you testified to the commission, Vincent Fernando was his name, and he testified that you wanted the suspects at Batalanda, quote, destroyed. That's what he testified.
He never gave evidence.
He did give evidence.
No report was stable. There was nothing to be found against me. That was an army camp that was established in a former housing scheme. Any case, that was not tabled in Parliament. There was nothing to be found against me.
Vincent stated that what he understood under the circumstances was that Mr. Wickremesinghe wanted the suspects destroyed.
Then asked if the incident was displayed by. I was not in the government. I was in the opposition. I've been in the opposition for 10 years. Look, there was no report. So you are quoting, if there's a report.
You were the Minister of Industry.
Look, but I'm telling you, there's no report.
I do have a report, but I've just literally read from
no
it.
Report.
Let's bring in Francis Harris,
former
BBC correspondent. Francis, what do you make of what you're hearing about Batalanda? What is the lack of accountability from Batalanda, the civil war? What does it mean, in your view?
I'm flabbergasted. I mean, I have a copy of the report here. It says printed by the order of the government. I'm sorry, but there is a report.
It was not tabled in
Batalanda
Parliament
report,
because
in English
they could
and
not stand by
Sinha.
it.
I mean, what you're hearing from former President Wickremesinghe is rather remarkable. What do you mean?
I think it's astonishing. I think his remarks about Shavendra Silva, the general he referenced, I mean, those are astonishing. To say that there isn't a case for Shavendra Silva to answer when the United States and the OHCHR, the UN, have made a case against him is utterly insulting to victims, and I think it just shows the impunity that he has supported. That's absolutely shocking. And we look basically at the JVP uprising time, the late 80s, where torture was endemic, where enforced disappearance happened on a massive scale, and we look at the connection between that and the civil war, and what the connection is that you see the same alleged perpetrators, and you might say also some of the same politicians who were involved in one era of violence went on into the next era of violence, and that's because there was never any accountability, because there was complete impunity, and this just is a cycle that repeats itself. And I'm afraid that somebody who's been in power that long needs to be answerable for that.
Isn't that the problem? No accountability.
Sorry, Francis, I was in the opposition. We've asked the government to prosecute me if there's something wrong, and they said there was nothing to be prosecuted on. I was here in London, I was in Oslo, and I was in Brussels, the time of the last 2 weeks of the war, trying to arrange to see what relief that can be given.
Let's take some questions from the audience. Okay. Let's go to the gentleman in the fifth row with the brown jumper.
Mr. Wickremesinghe, you've said in previous forums that you support the Palestinians' inalienable right to self-determination. You've applauded South Africa for the action that they're taking at the ICJ. You've spoken about an independent sovereign state for the Palestinian people. Why is there this hypocrisy and double standards? Why can the Tamil people not also have their own right to self-determination and also their own international action at places like the ICJ, the ICC?
The Palestinians have been recognized as a separate state. There has no international recognition for a separate Tamil state in Sri Lanka. Having said that, there is an issue which we still have to solve on the clashes that took place from 1983 to 2009, the numbers who disappeared on all sides, the people who were killed, and that we are moving towards by getting different groups. When I was president, I had a mandate to put the economy back on track. There's a lot more to be done. There are a lot of groundwork. This new government will, once they have let us know what their policies on the economy, they said they are going ahead with what I started, that's good. Then they will have to sit down towards the latter part of the year and decide how it is to be taken forward.
Gentleman here in the third row, yes?
Why is it the aftermath of the Civil War, the economic crisis, even after the tsunami, the Easter bombings, we can never get a clear answer of what's going on? It's like what Marvin Nattapatu said about Sri Lankan cricket. You know, bunch of Muppets headed by a joker.
No, I must say one thing.
There's no details. A lot of commissions, a lot of reports. Where are the details?
I'm sorry I couldn't do much, but my duty, I had a limited mandate. I was made president with agreement of the parties that we handle the economic issues. I've done that, and we go in for elections, and the new government will take all this up. So it's still being pending. But what are the issues that you wanted to know? You tell me, I'll tell you what the status is today. They are still not complete. So you ask me, if you tell me what specific issue is, yeah.
He's saying that I've been asking you specific questions about disappearances and killings.
Yeah,
and
I've
you don't want
told
to
you,
engage in
okay,
detail.
on disappearances, there is still investigations going on. There's a lot more to be done. We cannot locate everyone because most of them are not among the living. That's all.
Okay, let's take the question for this lady here. Do you want to ask your question?
As a witness from the Muliwaikal itself and a survivor of the Muliwaikal War, I think I have the right to ask this question. When the international community tried to bring the international criminal prosecution mechanism for the atrocities and the genocide that was committed against Tamils in 2015, you hijacked and pretended to co-sponsor a hybrid mechanism and made sure it failed. I wanted to ask you if you were afraid of the mechanism coming in place and what might come out.
We were asked, we did not hijack. We did not hijack. The president was asked to co-sponsor it in 2015 and he agreed to co-sponsor it. He asked me also, I said go ahead, co-sponsor it. When it came this side, there were two different views. So I said, let us first come to an agreement and you can take it up next time. And large section which didn't want to against co-sponsoring are now willing to sit down and talk of how we come to a final settlement.
Briefly, Francis, very briefly.
I don't think this is about a political settlement. This is about truth and justice, about a process that holds people accountable for gross, violations of human rights. And that's what she's talking about as a survivor.
So I was asked why we co-sponsored it
and
in 2015 and why we didn't do it this time, because we were able now to get people who are opposing it to sit down and talk of it. And we said, any case, this was all going to be rolled over into 224.
Oh, you agreed to a hybrid course, and then you backed down as soon as you agreed to it.
We've agreed to roll it over and take up our positions in 2025. I wanted a common position where we could get all together.
Gentleman here, yes, stand up.
1 month after the war in Gaza started, a right-wing American think tank published an article called A Rajapaksa Plan for the Complete Destruction of Hamas. And it went on to argue that Israel should employ precisely the tactics that the Rajapaksas had employed. And these tactics, as we know, involved basically herding hundreds and thousands of innocent civilians into so-called no-fire zones and then slaughtering them and bombing them. But importantly, then went on to say that Israel should then do what the Rajapaksas did and have nothing to do with any kind of international inquiry or process of accountability. Does it worry you that your failure to ensure that there was exactly such a process has actually encouraged, led to, legitimized and justified the kind of ignoring of international humanitarian law that we are seeing with such tragic consequences today in Gaza?
I haven't read that article, so I really don't know what exactly is there. I couldn't comment on it.
But the idea that some people on the pro-Israel side see the Rajapaksa model of war crimes, of attacking hospitals, as something to emulate.
No, there was no attacks on hospitals except what happened. Can you let me finish? The attacks on hospital was in Muliwaikal was the main where the hospitals came. Other ones were inquired into. There had been occasions where the Air Force had bombed and action was taken against some of them. But a large scale this thing, I wouldn't say that. I have been one of them who have been insisting that all hospitals should not be touched, and we went through that. What happened during the last stages of the war? Yes, there were problems there. I admit that. I won't say no to that.
UN experts found that throughout the final stages of the war, virtually every hospital in the Vani area, whether permanent or makeshift, was hit by artillery.
No. There was Air Force bombing. There had been artillery shells that had fallen at that time, but in each instances, we've been able to intervene. As opposition,
Government forces blocked the delivery of humanitarian aid. Sounds very Israeli.
Where?
In Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
According to a UN panel established by Ban Ki-moon, Sri Lankan government forces blocked the delivery of aid to victims of the war. Sounds very Gaza-like.
Those are incidents that should have been this thing. I admit that took place. You would ask me about Air Force bombing. That's all that I
want to go
say.
back to the audience. That gentleman's waiting, but Nurj, briefly.
A quick observation.
Please.
You got the wrong guy here being asked questions. You should have Rajapaksa here, because he was destroyed by Rajapaksa. He stood against Rajapaksa.
I saw him singing at his birthday party.
Well, that doesn't matter.
But we've got to go back to the audience. This gentleman has a question.
I'm from the British Tamil Forum. During the 1983,
Tamil Forum.
1983 pogrom, more than 3,000 Tamils were killed, some of them burnt alive. I very nearly got killed on Boris Gamo Road. My friend and his dad were not so lucky. They were burnt alive on that road. The businesses and houses of Tamils were burnt. As a cabinet minister at that time, what did you do?
I was responsible for running all the refugee centers, but what we went through there was inhuman. I've seen my Tamil friends suffering. I am in no way defending that. That was wrong. It was cold-blooded. People are getting killed. We tried our best and stopped some of the killing, but I immediately opened up the schools, said everyone to come in, and started supplying food. So that's what I could do. That may not be enough, but I did what I could do. But we were also out in the first 2 days, going all out. I know President Jayawardena was also doing a lot from there, but I won't go into those details. To accept what was wrong, we accept responsibility for that.
Do you accept war crimes were committed in Sri Lanka?
Look, will you let me finish? You didn't allow. No, you didn't allow.
War crimes were committed?
You didn't.
Do you accept war crimes were committed in Sri Lanka?
I have said we are sorry for what that happened.
But were they war crimes? Did war crimes occur in Sri Lanka?
It's not war crimes.
They're not war crimes.
No,
they were just horrible things.
Look, there are riots in all our countries. People get burned, but we have to know what happened was wrong, and that is the beginning of it.
Good to hear. We'll take last question here. We're out of time. Yes, do you want to stand up? Yes.
In October 2023, you ordered the police to release land in Mailathamadu Madhavane in Batikalo back to the Tamil farmers. However, you couldn't get it done. And to this day, Sinhala settlers and a Buddhist monk continue to encroach on these lands. So given Sri Lanka's long history of failing to act on such issues, doesn't this reflect the deeper problem of Sinhala Buddhist nationalist ethnocracy within the state?
Those who encroached on it were thrown out. We had asked the police to go in, take the orders, and System B lands should be kept for people in Batikalo, both the Tamils and the Muslims. System B is mainly for them and also for commercial development. That's the ruling I gave. So that land has to be given there. How to distribute it, what you do, those are different issues. But there can be no encroachment or lands given there because System C was given to the Sinhalese.
Last question from me. You've run for president several times and lost. Do you plan to run again?
I had no plans to run this time except I became president and I felt that I should give the country a chance. This is what I have done, give them opportunity. But it is a complete outcome where no one got overall majority. There will be other parties. No, I won't be running. I will be just watching your Al Jazeera head to head and hope that you will be better mannered, that's all.
Okay. Thank you all for joining me here in London's Conway Hall. Thank you to our panel of experts for joining us tonight. Thank you, Ranil Wickremesinghe. That was Head to Head on Al Jazeera English. Appreciate all of you at home for watching.